Hi there. Welcome to Parker Live. My name is Jacob Rhodes. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Parker Staffing. And with me is Vanessa Romero. Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm doing pretty good. Vanessa's here is to talk today about wine and picking wine. But before we get started, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about why we're doing this. And over the weekend, Vanessa and I were texting with each other and thinking about our talk today and what we were going to do. It seemed like I was worried that it would ring hollow after everything that's happened over the weekend. Now it's time for two people to talk about wine. I couldn't really think about anything more bougie more than that. But as I was thinking about it and kind of the mission of what we wanted to do with Parker Live, which is bring good into the world, I was thinking about why we started it. We have unfortunately, over 100,000 Americans have died because of the pandemic. And what we wanted to do was bring a little bit of good into the world to help people, just even for a minute, to take their mind off of the constant stream of negativity and bad information coming through. And with the protests and the rioting and the unfortunately, the attacks on American citizens that are happening right now, the same mission still stands. We still want to bring good out there. And if this helps you for 15 minutes, take your mind off of things, to disconnect from CNN and the stream of information and the texting and Reddit, and just helps you when you're at the grocery store with a mask on, pick out a good bottle of wine, then I think we've done our job here. So I told Vanessa that I was going to start with the hard question first, which is, Vanessa, is this still important? Do you think is wine still important for something like this?
Yeah, am biased and have a long history in wine, but I think one of the things that makes wine so special and that has always drawn me to it personally is that it's so much more than a beverage. Wine is ultimately all about people, and it is, if you look at how it's made, I mean, unless you're looking at some big mass-produced wine, most of the wine, and historically wine, is about a farmer and about a family, and it's about history and culture, and it's art and it's science, and it's all those things wrapped into one. But it's kind of, our world when it's at its best, being able to grow something in the land where you're from, your home, something that you can be so proud of that you put your family name on. I think there's a lot about wine that actually is exactly what we all want in this world and what we're trying to get back to, and happens to also be a really excellent beverage. But for that reason, I do think wine is important, and it's easy for us to forget those aspects of wine. Sometimes, we just open a bottle and you just need something to drink as a break, and that's excellent too. But wine is ultimately all about people and the coming together of people and sharing it with other people. And I think that is really important.
Yeah. And so I think that's a great point, Vanessa, and kind of good things to keep in mind as we continue. So why don't we just kind of to start? So I mentioned, Vanessa, you're in Anaconda, Montana right now, which is really cool, but maybe you can tell us about yourself and your background.
Yeah.
And who is that?
This is Josie. Yes. Work from home life right now. She's 3 months old, so newborn. She's doing all this with me, but this is Josie. I've lived in Montana for the past 3.5 years. Anaconda is a town of about 9,000 people, very small, but I do have a wine business here, and I do a lot of wine business locally, but also contractually around the States and around the globe. So historically, I've worked at wineries all around the world, kind of got started working at wineries in Spain and then South America and Argentina, Chile, eventually progressed on to Italy and France and worked for a number of importers, and there's various different types of wine certifications that you can get. So accumulated a number of those along the way and built a career in wine, mostly living in big cities out east or across seas. And a lot of it ended up being on the import side, helping wineries in different countries build their distribution network in the US. So it's always been something I've always been very passionate about. And there's so much learning to be done in wine. And here in Montana, I run a wine club and I do a lot of education and I do consulting for various restaurants and all of that, and work with actually some online wine retailers and everything as well too.
It's really cool. And so your wine club is Wines by V. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, Wines by V, winesbyv.com. It's also on Facebook and Instagram and all over, but we don't ship. It is something we may do in the future, but shipping is very complicated in the world of alcohol, highly, highly regulated. But so it works primarily here in Montana, or not primarily, is here in Montana. But then along with that, like I said, I do some contract work for people looking to do events, whether they're corporate or private, and I host classes and getting ready to open a little bottle shop here in our local town as well.
Well, great. Well, congrats. So let's talk about wine. It seems pretty good. So we have this reality right now where a lot of wineries are still closed. So for a lot of people, the grocery store has turned into that primary resource for wine. So what are some tips that someone maybe like me, when I go in, it's game time, I've got the mask on, I'm queued up, I'm in, and I want to get out of there, and I'm walking through kind of the alcohol in the wine aisle. So what are some good tips that you'd have that I can do to choose a good bottle?
Sure. The first tip I always give people, and this is feasible, a little bit more difficult during this time, is actually, if you have the ability to go to a local shop instead of a grocery store, you're going to have a higher chance of finding more quality product. But sometimes you just don't want to go to a second shop. If you're in the grocery store already, it's easy to go there. One of the first things I always tell people is it's kind of habit that we buy what we know and we buy what we've seen. But actually, if you pick up a bottle that you recognize because it's available in every store you go into, that means that it's pretty mass produced. And just like anything that's mass produced, the higher the quantity, it's harder to obtain a high level of quality. So I frequently tell people, don't buy the bottle that you see everywhere. So that's a really good thing to know. And then you can look at, another tip I give people is sometimes we tend to buy bottles by the label, but when we say that, we look at the front of the label and we like the design. And not to say that that can't have an influence, but a lot of good information can be found on the back of labels, actually. Mm-hmm. So if you flip a bottle around, and I'm going to give you some examples, actually. I have a couple of rosés here. In this bottle, it's called Hogwash Rosé. It is, if you turn it around and look at the back of the label, it says California Rosé Wine. And again, this is not a like fast and hard rule, because this is actually a really amazing bottle of wine. It's only about $16. But California is very vague. California is a huge state. Where in California is it? The more detailed it is, oftentimes that means it is a quality wine. And also rosé wine is very vague. A rosé can be made out of any grape, especially it's red grapes, and then they just get a small amount of skin contact, but it's pretty vague. That's actually a good wine, but a lot of times a wine that says California rosé wine, you just have no idea what's in there and you don't know what you're getting. And if it's very vague, then it could be lower quality. By contrast, if we look at this rosé, this is called Il Rosé de Casanova. It's by La Spinetta out of Italy. They both kind of have, some little creatures on the front. But this bottle on the back side, I know this is a little bit hard to see, but it says Toscana. So that's a specific sub-region, Tuscany of Italy. It says it's an IGT, which is a special classification. And it also tells you the grapes that are in it. It says it's 50% Sangiovese and 50% Prugnolo Gentile, which is a kind of Sangiovese out of that particular region. So this probably retails around $22 to $24. They're both good wines, but this one is slightly higher quality. And again, that's not a hard and fast rule, but it is something you can look at. Usually, if you pay a lot of attention to make really good wine to what you're doing, why would you not want people to know that and put it on that information on the label? So,
sure. So it's if I'm going in and just making a safe bet, and I don't know anything about grapes, but if I see a wine bottle that talks about the grapes that it uses, chances are it's going to be better experience than the one that I see everywhere in every single store that doesn't even mention a grape or anything like that.
Correct. Yeah.
And when you're talking about the back of the label and the stories that they talk about, I'm guessing the kind of keywords I want to read are, like hand-picked and family-owned or, words like that versus, a morning sunrise over the coast and all this fun stuff, right? Yeah.
Flowery language can sometimes be making up for a lack of facts about how it's made, and again, these are not hard and fast rules. There's bad wines that have lots of detail, and there's good wines that don't have very much. But flowery language is sometimes making up for something else, as is a really comical label. I can't tell you how many times people have tried to sell me wine to use in my businesses that features redheads on the label. Oh. And they aren't necessarily all bad wines, but I'm not going to buy it just because there's a redhead on there. So that's, those can be funny too.
So if I'm kind of taking the grocery store example, I turn the corner at my local grocery store and the first thing I see is regions hanging from the ceiling, like Italy and Chile, and then I see red and I see whites. What is kind of a general flight path I can take through that grocery store to where would you go first if you only have a few minutes?
That really comes down to your palate, and It depends on how much you know about your palate. It's one of my favorite things about wine is helping people learn their palate. Wines from the New World, which are the US and South America and New Zealand and basically everything except for Europe. There's New World and Old World. New World wines tend to have a little bit more of a fruit forward flavor profile. Sometimes they're a little bit easier. And Old World wines are known for sometimes having a little bit more of an earthy, musty quality. And of course, there's a million variations in grapes from the New World and the Old World, but those are very general characteristics. So I would start New World or Old World, depending on your palate.
Sure.
And then from there, usually we know one grape we all like. A lot of people, maybe they know that they like a cab. And so they can go to the California section and look for cabs. But oftentimes in that California section, they'll be grouped with similar grapes, or maybe it's similar regions. But if I were to set up a display of wines, I would typically, or on a menu, you'll see them lighter profile to heavier profile. And you can kind of assume that, a cab might be next to a Merlot. Maybe there'll be some Malbec there, depending on what part of the region you're in, all of that. So oftentimes similar wines are grouped together. So if you know one grape you like, you could go to that region, look at your price point, look at the details on the label, and pick one that is maybe new to you, but hopefully similar, and expand your palate a little bit.
Okay. So like leaving the grocery store, are there any places that you know of right now, the best places that you can get wine from?
I always suggest go to your local wine shop.
Okay.
And the reason I suggest that is because going there isn't just because they have a good selection. And oftentimes people assume that local wine shops are more expensive. But the truth is a local wine shop will have every price point as well. They'll have some higher end stuff, but they'll have $12 bottles also. But the beauty of that is when you own a wine shop, you taste every single bottle that goes on a shelf before it goes up there. And they have really great suggestions. They're generally owned or run by people who have really good wine experience and knowledge and palates, and they will get to know your palate. So you can go back over and over and over again and talk to the same person. Josie has a big interest in this. And eventually you can say, okay, that one, I thought it was like a 7 out of 10, but this one I thought was a 9 out of 10. And then they'll be able to suggest wines for you specifically as they get to know your palate. Us wine people kind of love and geek out over that. So that is definitely always my first suggestion to people buying wine.
Okay. You brought up a really good, a 13 or 15. So what's your current go-to bottle of wine? Like if you had a dinner party you're going to, or you just wanted something that you know is pretty good, what's your go-to?
This time of year, it's getting warmer, and usually with warmer weather, people want something lighter and more refreshing. So I tend to bring rosé out right now a lot. Rosés they've gone through a big transition. They used to be thought of as, white Zinfandel, low quality sweet wines, which they aren't in the slightest. They're really beautiful. And I think people now realize that. So I tend to bring out a mid-tier rosé that isn't super like acidic and racy, and then it's just kind of a crowd pleaser. There are, I'm spoiled because I have access to so many different wines. There's so many different types out there that you can pick up. And I would just say doing something that is pretty simple in a group environment is always good if you don't know what people like.
Okay. What in terms of, I kind of threw when we were first talking about the planning thing, like I mentioned like the gas station grab and goes. Is that like emergency use only, or when do you recommend that type of maneuver here?
I think it's pretty rare to find good wine in a gas station. There are exceptions. I think it's pretty rare. If I were desperate and stopped in a gas station, and I'm guessing they don't have much over $15, right? Maybe they range from $5 to $15. You can look for certain grapes that are easier to grow, or there's certain parts of the world that you can get a better price to value ratio. So one of the more popular familiar grapes and regions is Malbec, Argentina Malbec. Malbec grows really easily as a grape. Argentina is an affordable country. A lot of times what you're paying for in wine is real estate. Mm-hmm. So you can get a Malbec that's from Washington or from California or from all different parts of the world now. But, land in Napa is pretty pricey. Land in Mendoza, Argentina is not. So you can look for certain grapes like that, certain regions. The Loire Valley of France produces some amazing wines for a really low price point. Portugal, Spain, some Tempranillos can be similar. So those are some tips and little tricks that you can learn too.
Right. So generally speaking, if I'm in a gas station and I see an old world wine versus a new world wine for the same price point, I might be better served just going for that old world wine, just based on the history and the land and the availability of grapes.
It depends. I would say, again, a gas station probably wouldn't have a lot of high-end wine, but old world wine gets exceptionally pricey as well. And you can gain a lot of knowledge about how different wines are classified in different parts of Europe. Bordeaux can be very affordable.
Okay.
And a really good value, but Bordeaux is also some of the most expensive wine in the world. So places within the US that are more affordable maybe are like Virginia, some Idaho wines. California and Oregon tend to be pricier. So yeah, just something that you can pay attention to.
Okay, good. And I did have a question that was emailed in asking about decanters and if decanters are a good practice or what your thoughts on those are.
Decanters are excellent. And as many people know, they get really extravagant. You can get a very simple decanter. You can get a decanter that's shaped like a swan. You can get everything in between. And they vary in terms of their shape and whether they're glass or crystal, and how much aeration they get is usually the ultimate goal. I would say decanters usually fall in one of two categories. Somebody gets a decanter because they really want to aerate their wine well, especially if it's like a big red wine with a lot of tannin that needs some time before you drink it. In that case, the goal is oxygen contact with surface contact, and just getting that oxygen through the wine to release all those components. The other goal with decanters is sometimes just show, which is totally fine. If you're hosting a dinner party and you want to bust out your swan decanter because it's beautiful and wows people, then get the swan. Maybe it has less oxygen contact. It actually does less aeration, but some wines don't need any decanting. If you're pouring like a ready to drink new age Sauvignon Blanc in a decanter, it really isn't going to do much to the wine. If you're pouring a, old Barolo out of Piedmont that has a higher tannin content, then it's going to make a big difference.
Okay, great. Well, we're working on borrowed time with Josie there, so I don't want to take up too much more of your morning. But thank you very much. You mentioned a website and a newsletter that you're running. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, winesbyv.com. It is the website that I have. You can subscribe to the website there, and there are newsletters that goes out with information about different wines, and we have a wine club theme every month. So my focus with how I do wine is I really, really love to provide education, but not so much that it completely bores people. I think that the average person who drinks wine loves wine and genuinely does want to learn about wine, but they don't want to learn so much. They also want to just have fun. And if they do want to learn so much, there's plenty of resources where they can go dive in deep and read books and get that education. So winesbyv.com, have an Instagram page and a Facebook page where I'm always posting information and photos and all kinds of stuff as well.
Sure, and we'll share that. So, well, hopefully, your bottle shop will be open and people can take a road trip out to Anaconda. So let us know when that happens.
Will do. Thanks. You're always welcome.
Thanks a lot, Vanessa.
All right. Bye.
Bye.